The settlement check in my hand wasn't just for the $1,500 security deposit he stole. It was for the entire appraised value of his now condemned, worthless building. My lawyer had to explain it to me twice, but the number, with all its infuriatingly beautiful zeros, didn't change. But to understand how a 26-year-old paralegal ended up legally bankrupting her former landlord, we have to go back to the beginning. Before all this, my life was a meticulously organized collection of color-coded binders and billable hours. I worked for a mid-sized litigation firm downtown, the kind of place where the scent of old paper and fresh coffee hung permanently in the air. My job was to be the person who knew where everything was. I was the keeper of the facts, the architect of the paper trail. While the senior partners commanded the courtroom, I was the one back at the office who could, in under 30 seconds, find the exact email from 3 years ago that would dismantle an opponent's entire testimony. My desk was a fortress of precision. Deposition transcripts were tabbed by witness, discovery documents were cross-referenced with case law, and every single exhibit was logged in a spreadsheet so complex it made our IT guy sweat. I loved the order of it all. I found a deep, quiet satisfaction in taking a chaotic mess of information and wrestling it into a coherent, undeniable narrative. It was a skill that paid my bills and, more importantly, gave me a sense of control in a world that often felt unruly. This need for order spilled over into my personal life, specifically into the one-bedroom apartment I rented from Mr. Albright. It was on the 3rd floor of a pre-war brick building that had what realtors call character, which is code for old pipes and drafty windows. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I spent the first month patching and painting, scrubbing the history of a dozen previous tenants from the baseboards and floors. I treated that apartment like a crucial case file. Every scuff mark was documented on my move-in checklist. Every nail hole I made was carefully spackled and painted before I moved out, and I paid my rent on the 1st of the month, every month, without fail. I didn't interact with Mr. Albright much, which I considered a blessing. He was a portly man in his late 60s with a comb-over that fought a losing battle against the wind and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He owned this building and a few others, a fact he liked to drop into conversation as if it made him local royalty. Our first real conversation, beyond me handing him a check, happened about 6 months into my lease. A nasty winter storm had rattled the old building, and a hairline crack above my bedroom window had widened into a visible fissure, letting in a sliver of icy air. I called him, and to my surprise, he showed up an hour later. He stood in the middle of my living room, his wet boots leaving gray puddles on the hardwood floors I'd so carefully polished. "Well, now let's have a look," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. He followed me into the bedroom and squinted at the wall. "Ah, there she is." "It's letting in a draft," I said, my tone professional, as if I were reporting a discovery issue to a senior partner. "I'm worried it could get worse with the next freeze." He stepped closer and poked the wall around the crack with a thick finger. Nah. This old girl's got good bones. Just settling." He turned to me and gave me that hollow smile. "These old buildings, they breathe, you know, adds to the charm." With all due respect, Mr. Albright, I don't think a crack that's actively growing is charm. I think it's a structural issue that needs to be sealed. He chuckled, a wheezing sound, and patted my shoulder in a way that was meant to be fatherly, but felt deeply condescending. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, sweetheart. It's just cosmetic. I'll have my guy take a look when he's in the neighborhood next week." I knew next week was a myth. It was the landlord's version of "we'll circle back." But I was a good tenant, a quiet tenant. I didn't want to cause problems. So I nodded, documented the conversation in a dated note on my phone. Time, subject, his exact words, and his failure to commit to a firm date, and bought a tube of caulk and a roll of weather-stripping tape myself. I fixed it. I always fixed it. I believed, naively, that being the perfect, low-maintenance tenant would earn me some measure of respect. I believed that my meticulous record-keeping and responsible behavior would be rewarded with, at the very least, lawful return of my own money. I was wrong. Mr. Albright didn't see a responsible adult. He saw a doormat, and he couldn't wait to walk all over me. The day I moved out was the 1st of June, bright and offensively cheerful. I'd spent the last 48 hours on a cleaning frenzy fueled by coffee and the sheer, stubborn refusal to give Mr. Albright a single reason to withhold my deposit. The apartment was immaculate, a perfect blank slate. It smelled of lemon polish and fresh paint from where I'd touched up the nail holes. It was emptier, cleaner, and in far better condition than the day I'd moved in. I stood in the living room, my move-out binder tucked under my arm, waiting for him. He was, predictably, 20 minutes late. He didn't knock, just used his key, the sound of the lock turning feeling like an intrusion now that the space was no longer mine. He shuffled in, his gaze sweeping the room with a dismissive air. "All right, let's get this over with," he grunted, not making eye contact. "Good morning, Mr. Albright," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "As you can see, the apartment has been professionally cleaned, and all walls have been spackled and painted as per the lease agreement." He walked through the rooms, his shoes scuffing the gleaming floors. He ran a hand along a windowsill and grunted. He peered into the oven I had spent 2 hours scrubbing. He was looking for a fight, and it was clear he was annoyed he couldn't find one. Then, a slow, greasy smile spread across his face as he entered the bedroom and stopped in front of the wall with the infamous crack. "Ah, here we go," he said, pointing. "Look at this. Major damage." I stepped forward, opening my binder. "That's the structural crack I reported to you on January 14th, I stated calmly. "The one you dismissed as settling. I have a dated note of our conversation, and I also have before and after photos showing my cosmetic repair, which I did at my own expense." He waved a hand, dismissing my evidence. "You made it worse. All this caulk and tape stuff. Now I gotta get the whole wall replastered. That's expensive." He continued his sham inspection, humming and shaking his head. In the kitchen, he jiggled the faucet. "And this is shot. You must have been too rough with it. Needs a full replacement." "That faucet has been dripping since I moved in," I countered, flipping a page in my binder. "I have a copy of the email I sent to you about it 9 months ago, which received no reply." He just chuckled, a low, grating sound. He led me back to the living room and pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It wasn't a check, it was a bill. My heart began to thud, a slow, heavy drumbeat of disbelief. "So, after tallying up the damages," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine, full of smug satisfaction, "we've got the wall repair, that's about $600. The new faucet, parts and labor, another $350. The floors need to be completely refinished from all the scuffs your furniture made. That's $550 right there. And of course, a deep cleaning fee." "I have a receipt for the professional cleaners I hired yesterday," I said, my voice tight. "Doesn't matter. My guys have to do it right," he said, handing me the paper. "Total comes to $1, $500. I stared at the number. It was the exact amount of my security deposit. It was a work of pure fiction, a document of utter and complete fraud. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "This is theft." "It's business, sweetheart," he sneered. "This is the cost of living in one of my buildings. You are legally required to return my deposit or provide a legitimate, itemized list of deductions," I said, the paralegal in me taking over. "This is not legitimate. I have documented everything, Mr. Albright. Every scratch that was here when I arrived, every conversation we had, every repair I had to do myself. I have a mountain of evidence. I document everything. It's just how my brain works. And by the way, if you're the kind of person who appreciates that level of detail, you should probably subscribe if you haven't already, because you're gonna love what comes next." Mr. Albright just laughed, a full-throated, ugly sound that echoed in the empty apartment. He looked at me, at my binder, at the righteous anger burning in my cheeks, and he looked at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Your little binder isn't going to help you," he said, his voice dropping into a cruel, condescending tone. "You think you're so smart, but you don't know anything. You're not getting that money back." He leaned in a little, the stale scent of coffee on his breath washing over me. "A girl like you don't deserve it anyway. You'd just waste it. Consider it a fee for your education in how the real world works." He then turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the sun-drenched, lemon-scented room. I stood there, motionless, the fraudulent invoice trembling in my hand. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had dismissed my diligence, mocked my professionalism, and belittled my intelligence. He saw me as a, quote, pretty little head, a girl who didn't deserve what was rightfully hers. The shock lasted for about 30 seconds. Then it solidified into something cold, hard, and perfectly, beautifully clear. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had turned a simple security deposit dispute into a major case, and I was going to be the architect of his downfall. My hands were still shaking when I got back to my new apartment, a smaller, more expensive garden-level unit that always smelled faintly of damp soil. The box cutter I'd been using to slice open cardboard boxes lay on the counter, and for a fleeting, ugly moment, I imagined using it to shred the fraudulent invoice Mr. Albright had given me. But I didn't. I slid it carefully into a plastic sleeve and placed it in a new binder, the first entry in a file I labeled with his name. My training, my entire personality took over. When faced with chaos, you create order. You build a case. But before I could build a case, I had to exhaust all other remedies. That's what the senior partners always said. You never file a lawsuit if a phone call will suffice. You give your opponent every opportunity to be reasonable before you show them just how unreasonable you can be. So I took a deep breath, drank a glass of water, and sat on a cardboard box that served as my temporary chair. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. I would make one last appeal to his better nature, assuming he had one. He answered on the third ring. "Yeah?" "Mr. Albright, it's me," I said, my voice as level and steady as I could make it. "I'm calling to give you one final opportunity to resolve the matter of my security deposit amicably." There was a huff of air on the other end, the precursor to a laugh. "Amicably? I thought we resolved it. You owe me nothing, I owe you nothing. Clean slate." "That's not what the law says." I pressed on, ignoring the bait. "According to state landlord-tenant law, you are required to return my $1,500 deposit within 21 days. The list of damages you provided is entirely fabricated, and as I told you, I have extensive evidence to prove it. I have been a model tenant for 2 years. I never paid rent late, never caused a disturbance, and I left that apartment in better condition than I found it. I am asking you professionally and respectfully to do the right thing. Just mail me the check for what you owe me, and this will all be over." I laid it all out. The logic, my history of loyalty, the letter of the law. I gave him the easy way out, a simple transaction, a clean end. The silence on the other end was broken by a low chuckle. It started in his chest, a rumbling, wheezing sound that grew into a full-blown, ugly laugh. He was genuinely amused. The sound was so full of derision it made the hair on my arms stand up. "Oh, bless your heart," he finally wheezed, gasping for air. "You're still playing with your little rule book, aren't you? The law says this, the law says that. Let me tell you something about the law, sweetheart. It's for people who can afford it. You think you're going to take me to court over $1,500? Do you have any idea what a lawyer costs? I am a paralegal. I know exactly what it costs, and I know how to file in small claims court myself." I said, my voice starting to tremble despite my best efforts. This sent him into another fit of laughter. "Small claims? Oh, that's rich. You'll file your little papers, and we'll both show up, and who do you think the judge is going to believe? Me, a respected businessman who's owned property in this city for 30 years, or some little girl who probably broke a faucet because she doesn't know her own strength? Your evidence doesn't mean a thing. It's my word against yours, and my word is worth more." He paused, and his voice dropped to that same venomous, condescending tone from the apartment. "I told you, your education is complete. Now stop calling me. You're not getting the money back. Ever." The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. I sat there in the silence of my half-unpacked life, the phone still pressed to my ear. The cold, hard finality of his words crashed over me. He was right. He was absolutely right. What was I thinking? The $1,500 wasn't just some abstract number. It was the money I had already paid as a deposit on this new, damp apartment. I'd put it on my credit card, confident I'd pay it off the second Mr. Albright's check cleared. Now, it was just debt. Debt with a 22.9% APR. I could feel the interest accruing with every beat of my heart. I pictured my careful budget, my meticulously planned savings goals, all dissolving into a puddle of credit card payments. I felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had pushed me backward, undone months of my careful work. For a moment, the fight drained out of me, replaced by a hollow, sickening despair. He was a man of means, a respected businessman. I was a 26-year-old paralegal in a new apartment I suddenly wasn't sure I could afford. My binder, my photos, my dated notes, it all felt so childish and naive. He had the power, and I had a collection of paper. In his world, that's all it was. And in that moment, sitting on a cardboard box, I believed him. I felt small, stupid, and utterly, hopelessly defeated. I let his final, mocking words hang in the air long after the line went dead. I sat on that cardboard box in the gloom of my new half-empty life and let the defeat wash over me. He was right. His word was worth more than mine in the world he inhabited. He was the sun, a respected businessman, and I was just a tiny planet caught in his orbit, easily flicked away. The anger, the righteous indignation, it all collapsed into a thick, suffocating shame. He had played me, and I had fallen for it, waving my little binder of facts like a child's security blanket. The weight of the credit card debt, the sting of his condescension, the sheer injustice of it all pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. For a full hour, I did nothing. I just sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of my meticulously planned future, now boxed up and in disarray. I thought about giving up. I could swallow the loss, work extra hours, eat cheap, and eventually climb out of the hole he'd dug for me. It would be the mature thing to do, the path of least resistance. But then his voice echoed in my head again. A girl like you? You don't deserve it anyway. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud, just a quiet, definitive click. The shame didn't vanish, but it transmuted. It crystallized. The despair burned away, leaving behind an ice-cold resolve. He wasn't just a thief. He was a bully who believed his status made him untouchable. He believed my diligence was a weakness. He believed my knowledge of the law was a joke. He was wrong. He was right that small claims court was his turf, a game of perception he was better equipped to play. So I wouldn't play his game, I would create a new one. My laptop was perched on a stack of books. I flipped it open, the screen's glow cutting through the twilight filtering in from the garden-level window. My paralegal training wasn't just about organizing evidence for a pre-existing case. It was about knowing that every person, every business, every piece of property leaves a trail of paper in the public domain. Mr. Albright, the respected businessman, had to have a trail. I started with the city's public records portal, a clunky, archaic website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1998. It was the kind of system that frustrated most people into giving up. To me, it was home. I bypassed the simple search and went straight to the advanced database for the Department of Buildings. I typed in the address of my old building. And there it was. A history of permits, complaints, and inspections stretching back decades. I saw a complaint from 3 years ago about a leaking pipe, marked resolved. I saw a permit for a new water heater 2 years before that. It was a mundane history of an aging building. I filtered the results, looking for anything filed in the last 2 years, during my tenancy, and then I saw it. It was an entry logged 7 months ago, just a few weeks after I'd reported the growing crack above my bedroom window. The document type was listed as Facade Inspection and Safety Program Report. It was a mandatory filing for buildings of a certain age and height. He hadn't done it because of my complaint. It was a routine, city-mandated inspection he'd likely put off for as long as possible. The filing was a simple PDF attached to the entry. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was a document he himself had been required to commission and submit. I clicked the link, the file downloaded, and I opened it. It was a 40-page report compiled by a third-party engineering firm, full of dry technical jargon and grainy black and white photos. I scrolled past the preamble and the boilerplate legal disclaimers. My eyes scanned for keywords: structural, hazard, failure. I found the section on the facade. The engineer noted significant spalling and displacement of the brickwork on the northern elevation. That was my wall. Then I saw the paragraph that made the air leave my lungs. Observation 7.3, visible vertical fissure originating at the third floor lintel, consistent with advanced lintel deflection due to corrosion and loss of bearing. The crack reported by the tenant is not cosmetic, settling, but a primary symptom of imminent local failure. Recommended immediate shoring and replacement of steel lintel. Condition is classified as unsafe. Unsafe. It wasn't charm. It wasn't the building breathing. It was a symptom of imminent local failure. He knew. He must have known. He'd received this report, read the word unsafe, and then stood in my bedroom and patted me on the shoulder, telling me not to worry my pretty little head. I kept reading, my fury mounting with every line. It wasn't just my wall. The report was a symphony of catastrophic neglect. The parapet walls were leaning. The roof membrane was failing, allowing for widespread water infiltration into the substructure. The fire escapes he'd once bragged about painting were cited for advanced corrosion and non-compliant anchoring. His own hired engineer had professionally and methodically documented that the entire building was a death trap. I leaned back, the light from the laptop illuminating my face. Mr. Albright had laughed at my little binder. He'd mocked my faith in the rules, but in his arrogance, he had forgotten the most important rule of all. Never create a paper trail that can be used against you. He had paid for this report. He had filed it with the city. And in doing so, he had handed me the weapon, the ammunition, and the instructions on how to fire it. This wasn't about my $1.500 anymore. This was about the unsafe building he was renting to dozens of other tenants. My binder of evidence for small claims court was a pocket knife. This official, damning report was a bomb, and I was about to light the fuse. The laptop screen was the only light in the room, casting a pale, clinical glow on my face. I read the engineer's report 3 times. The first read was fueled by a white-hot, blinding rage. The second was with the cool, detached focus of a paralegal, absorbing facts, connecting dots, identifying weaknesses. The third read was as the architect. I wasn't just reading a report anymore. I was studying a blueprint for a demolition. Imminent local failure. Condition is classified as unsafe. The words were beautiful. They were objective. They were his own. He had paid an engineer to write his death sentence and had dutifully filed it with the city. My little binder of dated notes and before and after photos felt quaint now, like a child's diary. This report was an affidavit. It was a confession. My training kicked in, overriding the last vestiges of emotional turmoil. This was no longer a messy dispute. It was a case, and a case needs a file. I connected my laptop to the printer I'd unboxed earlier and printed all 40 pages. The machine whirred to life, spitting out page after page of his undoing. I took a yellow highlighter and marked every damning phrase: advanced lintel deflection, significant spalling, widespread water infiltration, and the crown jewel, unsafe. I 3-hole punched the stack and placed it at the very front of the binder I'd labeled with his name. The file was no longer about a stolen deposit. It was now titled, in my neatest block lettering, Albright Properties, Public Hazard. But a plan, like a legal argument, requires a logical sequence. The most brilliant case is useless if it's presented at the wrong time or to the wrong audience. He thought small claims court was his turf, a place where his word was worth more than mine, and he was probably right. So I had to make him believe that was the only fight I was capable of picking, and that I had already lost it, and needed to lower his guard so completely that he wouldn't see the real attack coming until the walls were literally crumbling around him. I sat down and composed a new email. It was the most difficult thing I'd ever had to write, because every word was a lie designed to feed his grotesque ego. Subject: security deposit, my old address. Mr. Albright, after our last phone call, I have had time to reflect on the situation and my own financial limitations. You were right. Pursuing this matter legally is not a viable option for me at this time. As such, I will not be taking any further action regarding the security deposit. Regards, my name. I read it over. It was perfect. It sounded like a white flag. It sounded like a little girl who had finally learned her lesson. I took a deep, steadying breath and hit send. The trap was set. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with his name. I let it ring twice, then answered, pitching my voice to sound tired and resigned. Hello? Just got your email, he said, and I could hear the triumphant smirk in his voice. It was thick and greasy, the sound of a cat toying with a half-dead mouse. I have to say, I'm proud of you. You made a smart decision. I said nothing, letting the silence hang. See? That's what I was trying to teach you, he continued, unable to resist the opportunity to gloat. The world doesn't run on your little rule books. It runs on common sense. You learn when to fight, and you learn when to walk away. You finally walked away. It's a good lesson for a girl like you to learn early. While he monologued, my fingers were flying across my keyboard. I had another email open, this one addressed not to a slumlord, but to a name I'd found on the Department of Buildings website, the Chief Inspector for the Facade Inspection and Safety Program. The subject line was already written: urgent notification, documented unsafe conditions, and tenant endangerment at building address. And you'll be better for it in the long run, he was saying, his voice oozing with condescending satisfaction. Consider that $1,500 the cheapest, most valuable tuition you'll ever pay. I attached the PDF to my email, the full 40-page report, his report. I wish you the best, he finished, his tone dripping with false magnanimity, no hard feelings. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I looked at the email on my screen, addressed to the one person in the city who could turn Mr. Albright's world into dust. In the body, I had quoted the engineer's findings verbatim and noted that the owner was fully aware of the report and was continuing to actively lease apartments in a building he knew to be an imminent danger to public safety. Goodbye, Mr. Albright, I said softly, and I hung up the phone before he could reply. My finger hovered over the mouse. The sound of his laughter still echoed in my ear. Your little binder isn't going to help you. I clicked send. The click of the mouse was a quiet, final sound in the stillness of my apartment. There was no explosion, no triumphant fanfare, just the faint hum of my laptop and the soft glow of the message sent confirmation on the screen. For a moment, I felt nothing but a profound and chilling calm. I hadn't screamed or fought or even raised my voice. I had simply taken the paper trail he'd so arrogantly left behind and rerouted it to its final destination. I had become what I'd always been, the person who knew where everything was, the architect of an undeniable narrative. The next few days were a masterclass in controlled anxiety. I went to work. I organized discovery documents. I cross-referenced deposition transcripts. I drank the same office coffee and breathed in the same scent of old paper. On the surface, my life was the picture of order. But underneath, a silent countdown was ticking away. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach lurched. Every unfamiliar number that flashed on the screen sent a jolt of electricity through me. But the calls were always for someone else, about some other case. The city's bureaucracy, I knew, was a slow-moving beast. I had fed it, and now I had to wait for it to digest. By Friday afternoon, The silence had become a weight. I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to see. I packed up my work bag, said my goodbyes, and instead of heading to the subway, I started walking north. The 20-block walk to my old neighborhood felt like a pilgrimage. With every step, my heart beat a little faster, a frantic drum against my ribs. Was I crazy? What if nothing had happened? What if his smug confidence was justified and my email had just been deleted by some bored city clerk? The image of his laughing face, so full of derision, flashed in my mind. It's my word against yours, and my word is worth more. I turned the final corner and I saw it. It wasn't just one car, it was three. 3 white city vehicles from the Department of Buildings, parked haphazardly at the curb, their emergency lights flashing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that painted the evening street in strobes of red and blue. On the sidewalk, a handful of my old neighbors were gathered in confused, anxious clusters, and on the heavy oak door of the building, my old front door, was a piece of paper. It was large, neon orange, and plastered right over the lock. From half a block away, I could read the single stark word printed in enormous black letters, vacate. My breath hitched. I slowed my pace, melting into the small crowd of onlookers across the street, pulling my jacket a little tighter. A man in a hard hat and a fluorescent yellow vest was speaking to a group of tenants, his voice calm but firm. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw the looks on their faces, shock, fear, and a dawning, angry realization. Then, a screech of tires. A beat-up sedan, the same one I'd seen Mr. Albright drive for 2 years, swerved to the curb. He burst out of the car, his face a mask of purple fury, his comb over a windswept disaster. He didn't even bother to close the car door. He marched toward the man in the vest, jabbing a finger at the vacate order. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Who are you? You can't do this! I own this building!" The inspector, a man who looked like he'd seen and heard every excuse in the book, didn't even flinch. He just held up a clipboard. "Sir, are you David Albright, the owner of record?" "You're damn right I am. What is the meaning of this? I passed my last inspection." The inspector's gaze was flat and unimpressed. "No, sir, you didn't. Your own engineer's report, filed 7 months ago, classified this building as unsafe. We received an urgent notification that you were aware of these conditions, specifically imminent lintel failure, a compromised facade, and a failing roof membrane, and continued to lease apartments in direct violation of city code and at extreme risk to your tenants and the public." Mr. Albright's face went slack. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. His eyes darted from the inspector to the vacate order, to the faces of his tenants, and then, as if drawn by a magnetic force, they found me. I was just standing there, across the street, watching. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just met his gaze. He saw me, and for a second, there was only confusion. Then the gears turned. The phone call, my email of surrender, the timing. The pieces clicked into place in his head, and the confusion curdled into a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He finally understood. I hadn't played his game. I hadn't gone to small claims court. I had gone over his head to the one authority whose word was worth more than his. He stumbled across the street, dodging a taxi that blared its horn at him. He got right in my face, his breath sour with panic. "You," he hissed, his voice a ragged whisper. "This was you. What did you do?" I looked at this man who had called me a little girl, who had laughed at my binder, who had told me I didn't deserve what was mine. He looked so small now, so powerless, crushed under the weight of a rulebook he thought didn't apply to him. "I didn't do anything, Mr. Albright," I said, my voice perfectly level, perfectly calm. "I just forwarded an email. Your report was very thorough. I just made sure the right people had a chance to read it." His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The respected businessman was gone. In his place was a fraud, a slumlord, exposed and cornered. The building behind him wasn't an asset anymore, it was a ruin. A multi-million-dollar liability that would drain him of every cent he had. The vacate order wasn't just a piece of paper, it was the execution of a sentence he had written for himself. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning catastrophic reality. He had stolen $1.500 from a paralegal, and in return, she had taken everything. I held his gaze for one last, silent moment. Then I turned and walked away, the sound of his panicked, sputtering gasps, swallowed by the sirens and the steady, impartial rhythm of the flashing lights. I didn't wait for his reaction. I just walked away, the flashing red and blue lights of the city vehicles painting the street behind me. I didn't look back. The image of his face, that mask of arrogant fury collapsing into pure panicked horror, was burned into my memory. That was enough. I went home to my damp garden apartment, made a cup of tea, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The next morning, a Saturday, I was sitting on my floor, finally unpacking a box of books, when a frantic pounding rattled my door. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor or the crisp rap of a delivery person. It was the desperate, uncontrolled drumming of someone who had lost their mind. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. There he was, a distorted fisheye version of the man from last night. His face was blotchy and swollen, his eyes bloodshot. The pathetic comb-over was gone, revealing a scalp slick with sweat. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. I took a deep, centering breath, smoothed my shirt, and opened the door. He practically fell into the room, his hands clasped together in a grotesque parody of prayer. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, sniveling terror. "You have to call them off," he gasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Please. You have to tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding." I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I didn't invite him in. I just stood there, blocking his path, my arms crossed over my chest. "The Department of Buildings isn't my pet, Mr. Albright," I said, my voice as cool and sterile as a legal filing. "I can't call them off. They are a city agency enforcing municipal code." "But you're the one who sent them. You can tell them. Tell them you were angry, that you exaggerated." He took a clumsy step forward, his eyes wild. "I'll give you the deposit back. Right now. I'll write you a check for $2,000. $3,000. Just make this stop." I almost laughed. $3,000. He was trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. "It's a little late for that, don't you think?" I said. "This is no longer about my security deposit." "Then what is it about?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "What do you want? I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want." This was the moment. The power had shifted so completely it felt like a physical force in the room, bending the air between us. He, the respected businessman, was on his knees in my doorway. I, the little girl, was the one holding all the cards. I let the silence stretch, watching him sweat. "First," I began, my tone dropping to the level of a senior partner dictating terms, "you need to understand the gravity of your situation. The city has condemned your building based on a report you commissioned. That's a fact. It cannot be undone." He started to sob, a quiet, wheezing sound. "My life is over. Everything. It's all in that building." "Yes, it is," I agreed, which brings me to my terms. "You're going to pay me a settlement. And if you agree to my terms and pay it quickly, then maybe I won't feel compelled to report the second violation." His head snapped up, the tears momentarily forgotten. "Second violation?" "During my research, I also happened to look through your public tax filings," I said, the lie tasting like justice. "It's amazing what you can find. For instance, claiming capital improvement deductions for repairs that were never actually made. The IRS tends to take a keen interest in that sort of thing. It's called tax fraud." The last bit of color drained from his face. He looked like a ghost. "So here is the deal," I continued, pressing my advantage. "You are going to hire a lawyer. My lawyer will speak to your lawyer. You will sign a settlement agreement complete with a non-disclosure clause that benefits only me. This will not be a protracted negotiation. These are the terms. There will be no lawsuit, no further reports to any other agencies. There will only be a quiet, simple transfer of funds. A severance package, you might say, for my trouble. He stared at me, his mouth agape. A settlement? How much? He whispered, as if afraid of the answer. I thought of his words, his sneering, condescending tone. Consider it a fee for your education. I looked him dead in the eye. The city's last property tax assessment valued that building, pre-condemnation, at $1.2 million. Of course, it's worthless now, a total liability. You couldn't give it away. The cost to repair it to code, to mitigate the damages you allowed to fester, will likely exceed that amount. You haven't just lost your asset, you've acquired a multi-million-dollar debt. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. I'm not an unreasonable woman, Mr. Albright. I don't want your debt. I just want the value you destroyed. My lawyer will be in touch to arrange the transfer of the full appraised value, $1.2 million. That is the cost of my education. That is the price for my silence. His lawyer, a man with tired eyes and an expensive but poorly fitted suit, didn't even try to fight. My own counsel, a sharp woman from a small firm who specialized in real estate litigation, handled the entire exchange. She told me later that Albright's attorney looked relieved to be getting off so easy, all things considered. The threat of an IRS audit, even a fabricated one, was a far more terrifying prospect than liquidating a now worthless asset to pay off a victim. The process was brutally efficient. He sold off 2 of his other properties, the ones not yet condemned, to cover the settlement. The final meeting took place in my lawyer's conference room, a sterile space with a view of the downtown skyline. I sat on one side of a large mahogany table. Mr. Albright sat on the other, flanked by his attorney. He never looked at me. He just stared at the wood grain, his face a hollow mask. He signed the papers with a trembling hand, his signature a spidery, broken thing. Then my lawyer slid a cashier's check across the polished surface. It was the settlement check from my memory, the one that had started this whole story. The number was just as beautiful and infuriating as I remembered. $1, 200,000.00. I folded it once, slid it into my binder, and walked out without a word. I saw him one more time about 6 months later. It was a miserable, rainy Tuesday, and I was stepping out of a cab in front of a new restaurant downtown. He was standing at a bus stop, huddled under the meager shelter, his clothes soaked through. He was thinner, grayer. The respected businessman was gone, replaced by a ghost haunted by his own arrogance. Our eyes met for a brief, fleeting second. There was no anger in his gaze, no hatred. There was just a vast, empty nothing. He looked away first, staring down at a puddle forming around his worn-out shoes. The bus arrived, and he shuffled on, just another anonymous man disappearing into the city. The money didn't turn me into a different person, but it did change my world. The first thing I did was pay off my credit card. The second was to move out of the damp garden apartment. I bought a small, new construction condo on an upper floor, with big windows and a view of the sky. The pipes didn't rattle, the windows didn't leak, and everything was up to code. I knew because I had my own engineer inspect it twice before I signed the papers. I didn't quit my job, not at first. The routine was comforting. But the billable hours and frantic searches for other people's facts started to feel small. The quiet satisfaction I used to find in it was gone, replaced by a restless energy. The settlement wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was the power to choose. So I built a new file. This one wasn't for a case or a landlord, it was for myself. I invested the money carefully, methodically, building a fortress of financial security so solid that no one could ever push me backward again. Then I quit. I went back to school, not for law, but for urban planning. My life is still a collection of meticulously organized binders, but now they're filled with zoning laws, housing policies, and blueprints for equitable development. I still love wrestling chaos into a coherent narrative, but I'm no longer just finding the email that wins a case. I'm trying to find the policies that prevent the fight from ever needing to happen. Mr. Albright taught me a valuable lesson, just not the one he intended. He taught me that the rules only matter if you have the power to enforce them. He thought his power was in his money and his status. He was wrong. True power is in the details, in the paper trail, in knowing the system better than the people who abuse it. The most important case I ever built wasn't for a senior partner. It was for me. And if you believe that a good story is all in the details, and you want to see what kind of case I build next, you should probably stick around for what's to come.